The air in the Roosevelt National Forest doesn't just get cold when the sun dips behind the granite peaks. It turns thin and predatory. It feels like something is pulling the oxygen right out of your chest. I have spent decades looking at maps and staring at the grainy photographs of people who simply ceased to exist in these woods. You start to see a pattern in the silence. You start to hear the logic in the things that should not make sense. On the 2nd of October in the year 1999, a 3-year-old boy named Jaryd Atadero walked into a patch of timber in the Big Thompson Canyon, and he never walked out. He was vibrant and full of that reckless energy, unique to toddlers. He was wearing a light blue pullover and tan pants. He was surrounded by 11 adults, 11 sets of eyes. And yet, in the space of a heartbeat, the forest opened up and swallowed him whole without a single sound. Without a snap of a twig. Without a cry for help. The group was part of a Christian singles retreat staying at the Combe Resort. They were headed up the trail toward the Big Thompson River. It was a beautiful Saturday morning. The kind of morning that lulls you into a false sense of security. The sun was hitting the ponderosa pines, and the scent of warm sap was thick in the air. Jaryd was a little ball of energy running ahead of the group, then running back. He was playing a game of tag with the mountain itself. Jaryd Atadero, Jaryd's father, had stayed behind at the resort. He trusted the group. He trusted the trail. But the trail is not a sidewalk. The trail is a narrow strip of human intention cutting through a landscape that does not care about your intentions. It is a place where the rules of the city do not apply. At approximately 11:30 in the morning, Jaryd ran ahead of the main group. He encountered 2 fishermen on the trail. These men saw the boy. They even spoke to him. They asked him if he was alone. Jaryd, with the innocent confidence of a child, told them he was with his group. He turned around and headed back toward the 11 adults, who were only a short distance away. But he never reached them. He didn't just wander off. He vanished in a corridor of space that was being watched from both ends. The fishermen were behind him. The group was in front of him. There was nowhere to go but the steep, unforgiving slopes of the canyon walls. And a 3-year-old cannot scale a vertical cliff in the time it takes to blink. When the group realized Jaryd was missing, the panic didn't set in immediately. They assumed he was hiding. They called his name. Their voices echoed off the rock faces, bouncing back with a hollow, mocking quality. But as the minutes turned into an hour, the mountain began to feel different. The shadows seemed to grow longer than they should have been for noon. The search began in earnest. Hundreds of volunteers, professional trackers, and canine units descended on the Big Thompson Canyon. They had helicopters with thermal imaging. They had bloodhounds that could catch a scent from a week-old sock. But the dogs did something strange. They didn't catch a scent. They didn't even try. They sat down. They whined. They looked up into the trees with a kind of primal dread that should have told the searchers everything they needed to know. Something was wrong with the physics of this place. I have looked at the search logs from those first few days. It was a massive operation. They combed every square inch of that trail. They checked the river, though the current was low, and Jaryd was afraid of the water. They checked the crevices in the rock. Nothing. No footprint. No scrap of blue fabric from his pullover. It was as if the boy had been lifted vertically off the face of the earth. The weather turned. A storm rolled in, as it always does in these cases. The snow began to fall, burying any potential clues under a shroud of white silence. The search was eventually called off. Jaryd Atadero was left with a hole in his life that no amount of prayer or police work could fill. He spent years wondering if his son had been abducted or if he had simply stepped into a fold in the world. A place where time and space work differently. 4 years passed. 4 years of silence. Then in June of 2003, 2 hikers were exploring a steep, rugged area about 550 feet above the trail where Jaryd was last seen. This wasn't a place a child would wander. This was a 60-degree incline covered in loose scree and dense brush. It was a climb that would challenge a fit adult. And there, near a cluster of rocks, they found a single shoe. A small tan sneaker. Then they found a pair of pants. And a sweatshirt. They were Jaryd's clothes. But they weren't scattered by scavengers. They weren't torn to shreds by a predator. They were sitting there. Waiting. The pants were turned completely inside out. The sweatshirt was turned inside out. There was no blood. No hair. No sign of a struggle. Just the empty shells of a child's wardrobe inverted as if the body had been pulled out of them like a hand out of a glove. The investigators will tell you it was a mountain lion. They always say it was a mountain lion. They claim a cat grabbed the boy, carried him 500 feet up a near vertical slope, and then meticulously licked the clothes off him. But have you ever seen a mountain lion eat? They are messy. They tear. They leave blood. They don't turn your clothes inside out. And they certainly don't leave the victim's skull fragment and a single tooth sitting neatly near the clothing years later. When the forensic teams analyzed the skull fragment, they found something even more unsettling. There were no puncture marks from teeth. No crushing injuries consistent with a predator's jaw. The bone looked like it had been weathered by the elements, but it was remarkably intact for something that had supposedly been at the mercy of the wilderness for 4 winters. It felt staged. It felt like someone or something had placed those items there long after the search had ended. Think about the energy required to carry a 30-pound child up that slope. Think about the silence required to do it while 11 adults and 2 fishermen were within earshot. If a mountain lion had snatched Jaryd, he would have screamed. A 3-year-old's scream is a piercing, unmistakable sound that carries for miles in a canyon. Nobody heard a thing. Not a scuffle. Not a whimper. The forest just went mute. This is a common thread in these disappearances. The silence. It's as if a bell jar is dropped over the victim, cutting them off from our reality before they are moved to another. Some call it a predator. I call it an anomaly that we are not equipped to understand. The shoes are the most disturbing part for me. One shoe was found, but where was the other? If a predator is dragging a body, the shoes usually fall off near each other or stay on the feet. But in so many of these cases, we find one shoe miles away from the other, or one shoe is found, and the other is never seen again. It's as if the process of abduction involves a total disregard for the physical integrity of the person's belongings. And the inside-out clothing. That is a hallmark of something truly bizarre. You see it in high-altitude pulmonary edema cases where people get confused and undress, but a 3-year-old doesn't have the dexterity to turn his pants inside out while he's dying of hypothermia. And he certainly doesn't do it before he climbs 500 feet up a cliff. I have walked those trails. I have felt the weight of the air in the Roosevelt National Forest. There is a sense of being watched not by eyes but by the very trees and stones themselves. There are places in this world where the veil is thin, where things that don't belong to our ecosystem occasionally reach through and pluck something vibrant and young from our side. We want to believe in mountain lions and kidnappers because those are things we can hunt. Those are things we can lock in a cage. We don't want to believe in a force that can bypass 11 adults and leave a child's clothes inside out on a mountaintop. We don't want to admit that we are not the top of the food chain in the places where the roads end. The case of Jaryd Atadero remains officially closed, attributed to animal attack. But Atadero knows the truth isn't that simple. He has spent his life seeking answers that the authorities are too afraid to give. He knows that the physics of his son's disappearance don't add up. He knows that the mountain took his son and then years later gave back just enough to tease him with the impossibility of it all. The skull fragment. The tooth. The inside-out clothes. It's a puzzle with pieces that don't fit the frame of our reality. And every time I look at the photos of that blue pullover, I feel a chill that has nothing to do with the Colorado wind. We are left with the silence of the Big Thompson Canyon. A silence that has reigned since 1999. If you go there today, you might see the beauty of the peaks and the rush of the water, but look closer at the slopes. Look at the places where the granite meets the sky. There are things moving up there that don't leave tracks. There are shadows that don't move with the sun, and they are waiting for the next person to run just a little too far ahead of the group. For the next person to blink and find themselves on the wrong side of the veil. This pattern isn't isolated to Colorado. It's a ghost that haunts the entire map of our national parks. Take the case of young Dennis Martin in the Great Smoky Mountains back in 1969. 6 or 7 years old. He was playing hide-and-seek with his family. He went behind a bush and simply never came out. A massive search involving the Green Berets and the FBI found absolutely nothing. Not a shoe. Not a scrap of cloth. Just like Jaryd. He vanished in a window of seconds while people were looking right at the spot where he should have been. Or consider the disappearance of little Bobby Bizup in the Rocky Mountain National Park in 1958. He was at a camp, he went for a short walk, and he disappeared. A year later, his clothing and a few bone fragments were found in an area that had been searched multiple times. An area high above where he could have possibly climbed on his own. These stories are not just tragedies. They are warnings. They are data points in a map of the unknown that we are too terrified to draw. We tell ourselves stories about bears and lions to keep the dark at bay. We build fences and we carry whistles. But when the mountain decides it wants you, no whistle will save you. No group of 11 adults will hear you leave. You will simply become another name in a file. Another set of clothes found inside out on a ledge that no human was meant to reach. Sleep well tonight, but if you hear the wind howling through the pines, remember, Jaryd. Remember that the forest is always listening. And it is always hungry. The fluorescent lights in this office have a hum that settles right in the base of your skull, a low-frequency vibration that reminds you of things you would rather forget. I sit here surrounded by topographical maps and police reports that have grown yellow at the edges, smelling of old dust and the bitter dregs of 1,000 cups of lukewarm coffee. You start to see patterns when you stare at the static long enough. You start to realize that the wilderness we love to photograph and hike through is not just a collection of trees and rocks, but a vast, indifferent machine that occasionally reaches out and takes a piece of us. It does not do it with the messy violence of a predator most of the time. No, it is something cleaner and far more terrifying. It is a displacement. It is a glitch in the very fabric of the geography that we claim to have conquered. I think about Jaryd Atadero often. I think about the weight he has carried since October 2nd, 1999. A weight that would have crushed a lesser man into the Colorado dirt. He went into the Big Thompson Canyon with a group of 11 adults and 2 children, a simple outing on a trail that was supposed to be safe. His son Jaryd was only 3 years old, a bundle of energy in a blue pullover and tiny sneakers. Jaryd was there laughing and running, and then, in the space of a few heartbeats, he was gone. He ran ahead to talk to some fishermen near the river, a distance of perhaps 100 feet. When the adults caught up, the fishermen were there, but Jaryd was not. The fishermen said they had seen him, spoken to him, and watched him walk back toward his group. In that tiny corridor of space and time, the boy simply evaporated into the thin mountain air. The search that followed was a monumental effort, a desperate scouring of the crags and the brush that lasted for days and then weeks. They used helicopters with thermal imaging scent dogs that could track a ghost through a graveyard and hundreds of volunteers who moved in lines so tight they could touch hands. They found nothing. Not a footprint in the soft mud by the water, not a single thread from that blue pullover caught on a mountain mahogany branch. It was as if Jaryd had never existed at all, as if the mountain had opened a mouth and swallowed him whole without leaving so much as a burp. The dogs were the most unsettling part of it. They would reach a certain point on the trail and simply sit down whining and refusing to move forward, their hackles raised as if they were looking at something the human eye was not calibrated to see. For nearly 4 years the silence was absolute. Then, on June 4th, 2003, 2 hikers stumbled upon something on a steep, treacherous slope more than 500 feet above the trail where Jaryd vanished. It was a place no 3-year-old could have reached on his own, a vertical scramble that would challenge an experienced climber. They found his shoes first. They were sitting side by side, neatly placed, not scattered by the frantic movements of an animal or the sliding of a body. Then they found the pants and the blue pullover. The clothes were inside out. This is a detail that repeats in these files like a recurring nightmare. When you find the clothing of the missing, it is often turned inside out as if the person was pulled out of their garments like a hand being withdrawn from a glove. There was no blood. There were no signs of the violent tearing that accompanies a mountain lion attack. A lion does not unzip a jacket and carefully remove a child. A lion does not leave a tiny tooth and a single fragment of a skull in a way that feels like a grim offering. Jaryd Atadero was given back just enough of his son to ensure he would never have a moment of peace again. He knows that the physics of his son's disappearance do not add up. He knows that the mountain took his son and then years later gave back a puzzle with pieces that do not fit the frame of our reality. The skull fragment had been there for a long time, bleached by the sun, but the clothes looked remarkably well preserved for having endured 4 winters of Colorado snow and wind. Every time I look at the photos of that blue pullover, I feel a chill that has nothing to do with the Colorado wind. We are left with the silence of the Big Thompson Canyon, a silence that has reigned since 1999. If you go there today, you might see the beauty of the peaks and the rush of the water, but I want you to look closer at the slopes. Look at the places where the granite meets the sky, where the shadows seem to have a weight and a thickness that defies the light. There are things moving up there that do not leave tracks in the scree. There are shadows that do not move with the sun, entities or forces that treat our physical laws as mere suggestions. They are waiting for the next person to run just a little too far ahead of the group, for the next person to blink and find themselves on the wrong side of the veil. This pattern is not isolated to the high country of Colorado. It is a ghost that haunts the entire map of our national parks, a predatory presence that seems to favor the young, the elderly, and the highly intelligent. Take the case of young Dennis Martin in the Great Smoky Mountains back in 1969. He was 6 or 7 years old, a healthy boy on a Father's Day outing at Spence Field. He was playing hide-and-seek with his siblings and friends, a game played by millions of children every year. He went behind a single, isolated bush to hide, planning to jump out and scare the adults. He simply never came out. The disappearance of Dennis Martin triggered one of the largest search and rescue operations in the history of the National Park Service. They brought in the Green Berets, the FBI, and thousands of volunteers. They literally turned over every leaf and stone in that area. They found absolutely nothing. Not a shoe, not a scrap of cloth, not a single drop of blood. Just like Jaryd, Dennis vanished in a window of seconds while people were looking right at the spot where he should have been. There were reports of a rough-looking man seen in the woods nearby, and a family reported hearing a sickening scream followed by the sight of a creature or a man carrying something over its shoulder. But the official record is a blank wall of frustration and silenced witnesses. Or consider the disappearance of little Bobby Bizup in the Rocky Mountain National Park in 1958. He was 10 years old, a bright boy who was at a religious camp called St. Marlo's. He was hearing impaired, which meant he was always keenly aware of his surroundings, using his eyes to compensate for what his ears could not catch. He went for a short walk, a distance of less than a few hundred yards from the main camp area. He disappeared into the afternoon light. A year later, his clothing and a few bone fragments were found in an area that had been searched multiple times by professional teams. The location was high above the camp on a ledge that a 10-year-old boy, especially one with his physical limitations, could not have possibly climbed on his own. These stories are not just tragedies to be mourned and forgotten. They are warnings etched in the dirt and the stone of our public lands. They are data points in a map of the unknown that we are too terrified to draw, because to draw it would mean admitting we are not at the top of the food chain. We tell ourselves stories about bears and mountain lions to keep the dark at bay because we can understand a predator with teeth and claws. We build fences and we carry whistles and we pack bear spray thinking these tools will protect us from the abyss. But when the mountain decides it wants you, no whistle will save you. No group of 11 adults will hear you leave, and no scent dog will be able to follow where you are going. The air in these parks can change in an instant. You might feel a sudden drop in temperature or a silence so profound that it feels like the world has been placed under a vacuum seal. You might notice that the birds have stopped singing and the insects have gone quiet. That is the moment you should start running. That is the moment the veil is thin. You will simply become another name in a file, another cold case for a weary investigator to obsess over in the middle of the night. You will become another set of clothes, found inside out on a ledge, that no human was meant to reach, a grim monument to a force we cannot name. The statistics are there if you have the stomach to look for them. Thousands of people have vanished in our parks under circumstances that defy conventional explanation. They disappear in clusters, in specific geographical hotspots where the earth seems to have a hunger that is never quite satisfied. We call them national treasures, we call them sanctuaries, but to the people who never came home, they were something else entirely. They were traps. They were hunting grounds where the rules of time and space are skewed, where a child can be transported miles away and hundreds of feet up in the blink of an eye. I often think about the wild man reports that surfaced during the Dennis Martin search. A witness described a hairy, unkempt figure fleeing through the brush, something that looked more like a beast than a man. The authorities moved quickly to discredit the witness, to bury the report under a mountain of bureaucracy. Why? Why were the Green Berets really there, and why were they operating on their own radio frequency, refusing to coordinate with the local search teams? There are layers to these stories that the public is never meant to peel back. There are secrets buried in the roots of the ancient pines that would shatter our sense of security if they ever came to light. Think about the sheer impossibility of the clothing being inside out. To remove a shirt from a person and have it end up inside out, you have to pull it over their head and down their arms in a specific, deliberate motion. An animal does not do this. An animal shreds. An animal bites and tears. The fact that the clothes are often found intact yet inverted suggests a level of manipulation that is almost clinical. It suggests that whatever is taking these people is interested in the body, but has no use for the coverings we wear. It is as if we are being harvested, our shells discarded like the skin of a cicada. The silence of the mountains is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of an observer. When you are out there on the trails and you feel that prickle on the back of your neck, do not ignore it. That is your primal brain telling you that you are being watched by something that does not have eyes as we know them. It is a presence that has been here long before we paved the roads and built the visitor centers. It is a presence that knows every cave, every crevice, and every fold in the map where a human can be tucked away and never found again. We are visitors in a house that does not belong to us, and the owner is occasionally prone to bouts of cruelty. We want to believe in a rational world. We want to believe that if we follow the rules and stay on the trail, we will be safe. But the files on my desk tell a different story. They tell a story of a 3-year-old boy who vanished in seconds, and a 10-year-old boy who ended up on a mountain peak, and a 6-year-old boy who stepped behind a bush and into another dimension. These are not outliers. These are the symptoms of a reality that is far more complex and dangerous than we are led to believe. The mountain is a living thing, and it has a memory that spans eons. It remembers when we were just prey huddling in the mouth of a cave, terrified of the things that moved in the dark. Sleep well tonight, but if you hear the wind howling through the pines, remember Jaryd. Remember the blue pullover. Remember that the forest is always listening, and it is always hungry for the next soul that wanders too close to the edge of the known. There are patterns in the chaos, and once you see them, you can never unsee them. You will look at the wilderness, and you will not see beauty. You will see a vast green mouth waiting to close. This is the truth that the official reports won't tell you, the truth that stays hidden in the shadows of the Big Thompson Canyon. Before I close this file for the night, I have to mention the case of Stephen Kubacki. In 1978, he disappeared near Lake Michigan while cross-country skiing. His skis and poles were found neatly placed, and his footprints simply stopped in the snow as if he had been lifted directly into the air. He woke up 15 months later in a field in Massachusetts, wearing clothes that were not his and having no memory of the intervening time. It is a rare case where the mountain, or whatever took him, actually gave the person back. Most are not so lucky. Most become nothing more than a skull fragment and a tooth, a lingering question mark in the heart of the great outdoors. The patterns are there, stretching from the 1950s to the present day, a line of breadcrumbs that leads nowhere. The authorities will tell you it is just the harshness of nature, the result of exposure and animal predation. But we know better. We know that a mountain lion does not leave your shoes side by side. We know that a bear does not turn your pants inside out. We know that there are places in this world where the map goes blank, and if you step into those places, you might find that the way back has been erased behind you. Stay on the trail, keep your children close, and never ever blink.